Good evening. I'm Matt Ewend. I'm a practicing neurosurgeon at the UNC Medical Center and the Chief Clinical Officer for UNC Health. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for your continued hard work to care for all of our patients and for one another during this pandemic. For those of you on the call celebrating Hanukkah, thank you for being with us. We'll work to move efficiently through our program so you can be with your family. Tonight is part one of a planned two-part series to educate our teams about the COVID-19 vaccine. In the next 45 minutes, we'll be discussing vaccines and COVID-19, focusing on the state of the COVID-19 pandemic in North Carolina, how these vaccines work, the best information about safety and efficacy, how we will reach underrepresented populations, and then we will answer the many questions that we've heard from all of you. Many of you are interested in knowing exactly how you will receive the vaccine. We have a large task force working across UNC Health and with each of our hospitals and coordinating efforts with the state to determine how the vaccine will be delivered and then how it will be administered at each of our entities. The logistics at each hospital will be slightly different. You'll be invited to a second town hall early next week, and that will focus on the details of how you will receive the vaccine. If you participate in both town halls, you'll be fully informed about the vaccine and then about how UNC Health will deliver it to you. I've been asked multiple times whether UNC Health will make this vaccine, like the flu shot, mandatory. Let me be clear, we will not be making the COVID-19 vaccine mandatory. However, we will strongly encourage our teammates to get vaccinated. While we're still learning the details of how the vaccine will be delivered and how the clinics will administer the vaccine, we have plenty of information to be assured that the vaccine is safe. I'm a practicing neurosurgeon at the medical center, and I expect in the near future to be contacted, to be told that based on my clinical practice, not my administrative title, that I will be eligible to receive the vaccine. When it's my turn, I will gladly roll up my sleeve and take my shot for the good of my patients, my coworkers, my family, and me. In the meantime, I'll wear my mask, I'll wash my hands, and I'll stay 6 feet apart. One of the pleasures of working at UNC Health is that we can call on members of our team who are not just the UNC Health expert, but are state, national, and international experts to answer your questions. Tonight, you will hear from 7 of these experts as we share the information you need to make an informed decision about the COVID-19 vaccine. I'd like to start by introducing my colleague, Dr. Tony Lindsey, who's the System Chief Medical Officer. Dr. Lindsey has been working every day since the start of this pandemic with the Chief Medical Officers at every hospital in our system to help keep us safe and to care for our patients. Dr. Lindsey?
Thanks very much, Dr. Ewend. Isn't it remarkable that 1 year ago, none of us had heard of COVID-19? After a flurry of readiness activities and anticipation, our first hospitalized patient was admitted on March 14th. Fortunately, in the spring, because of many statewide interventions and pretty good compliance at times with a lot of preventative measures, there was a gradual buildup of hospitalized patients. This was fortunate for us because my colleagues on the front line say we really learned how to better take care of these patients. We had a remarkable response across this system with activities related to hospital readiness, standing up respiratory diagnostic centers across North Carolina, and amazing testing support that we've had from Dr. Miller and her lab colleagues all across the state. Even then, some of our hospitals and communities were disproportionately impacted, namely Early, Chatham, Johnston, Nash, Wayne in particular. At UNC Health, we have admitted around 5,000 COVID patients, seen 123,000 completed over 22,000 COVID tests. At the same time, we've taken care of all the non-COVID patients who certainly didn't go away. unfortunately. Fall came and the rate of spread increased all across our country, certainly in our state, and you all have felt that. We've seen in our current hospital numbers and our excellent COVID modeling the sad impact of that. And currently, we have, at least a couple hours ago, we had 304 patients with COVID admitted to our hospitals across the state. That is over 100 more than we had 4 short weeks ago. Our model currently predicts, assuming the current North Carolina transmission rate, that this will gradually increase over the next 6 weeks before beginning to decline. You know very well that your hospital, our hospitals are stretched thin, and everyone's going to continue to need to pull together, get our patients and each other through this. But there's good news. There's several. The scientific discoveries are giving us additional tools to fight this virus. For example, we started giving monoclonal antibody treatments to decrease hospitalization and mortality in high-risk patients several weeks ago. As of today, across the system, we've given over 100 doses. And there are going to be more of these treatments in the near future. And even more exciting, we expect to begin delivering a highly effective vaccine at UNC Health in the next week. And my colleagues on this call are going to spend the remainder talking to you about that. As an aside, like Dr. Ewend, I've reviewed all available data, and I will get the vaccine as soon as I am eligible. I'd like to say one more thing. At UNC Health, COVID patients, it's very obvious that they're receiving great care. And I have regular communication with medical, nursing, and other local hospital leaders, and they're doing a fabulous job. But what is crystal clear to me is that UNC Health patients are receiving this excellent care due to the dedicated frontline people all over our system, from the bedside nurse to the respiratory therapist, to the environmental services worker, to the lab technician, to the physician, and many, many more. And I'm frankly, the more I learn around the system, I'm in awe of your expertise and commitment and compassion. I would like to express my sincere gratitude for everything you're doing to serve our patients. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Tony. I'd next like to introduce Dr. David Wohl, a professor of infectious disease. Dr. Wohl is probably better known to all of you as the News and Observer's Tar Heel of the Month for his contributions to taking care of COVID-19 patients in North Carolina. Dr. Wohl?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here and an honor to be among my colleagues who have been working tirelessly. And Matt, I think at this point, my charge is to help people understand a little bit more of how the vaccines work. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Great. So one thing I think we should all do, and this is good to start out with, is understand what vaccines do. And I think most of us understand this, but the people who make vaccines, they're tricksters. What they're trying to do is create vaccines that fool the immune system of our body to believe it's responding to an infection when really it's reacting to a mimic. So in the case of COVID-19, the vaccines being developed, they all share one feature, which is they're trying to present to our bodies the spike proteins on the surface of the virus. This is a spike protein that does what it sounds. It spikes into cells to get the virus into our cells where it can harm our cells and reproduce. By waving that spike protein in front of our cells, it triggers our cells, many of them in our immune system, to make antibodies. These antibodies glom onto the virus and prevent it from actually entering our cells. By putting antibodies all over the spike no longer can do what it needs to do. So that's really key. All the antibodies being developed right now target a very similar target, the spike protein. How they do it, though, differs. And the first 2 vaccines that you've heard about and that are going to be given to people like me and like you, many of you, is using a very sophisticated technique that is very powerful and has been developed for a number of years. It's called mRNA. mRNA is really just a way that our cells communicate with one another. And so it's a message, like a text message that you send and then goes away. So like Snapchat, remember Snapchat? Snapchats came and gone away, but you'd send a message and it would delete within a few moments, right? That's what happens with mRNA. And so we could send an mRNA message into our cells that says, hey, just for a few moments, make some of those spike proteins. Then the body sees that, and then you have that reaction we talked about. The other way to do it is to directly put in some of that spike protein into our bodies and let the body react. And that's another method that's being studied. What's really interesting about our immune systems is that see me once, okay, great. See me twice, even better. So once we get introduced to a new infection, we make a response and then we remember it. And so when we have that introduced to our bodies again, we trigger a primed response. And that's what we can do with our vaccines. So first shot gets you some protection, and we're seeing that in the Pfizer data just released today. But a second shot really cements the deal. Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines, they really use very similar technology. And while there may be some differences between them, I think their similarities really outweigh or are greater than any differences. So I think for me, it's like Coke and Pepsi right now. So I think we could feel good about both of the data that we're seeing from both the Moderna and Pfizer vaccine right now, because they look very similar, use very similar techniques. And I think we'll probably be just as safe as one another. So I'll stop there.
David, thank you. It's very informative. I'd like to turn now to Dr. Cindy Gay. Dr. Gay is Associate Professor of Infectious Disease and was the UNC Principal Investigator for the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine here in Chapel Hill and is a national expert on this topic. And she's going to talk to us about the vaccine trials. Dr. Gay?
Yeah, hello to everyone. It's great to be here. What I can tell you is I've been sort of living and breathing COVID-19 and also thinking about COVID-19 vaccine trials since the beginning of the summer. And I understand and have gotten a lot of questions and comments about the pace of these studies and are things, safety steps being missed, and why should I take the vaccine? So I feel like my role and my hope is for those who are concerned about that to allay that, to provide some information that's really going to help people understand what has been accelerated and what hasn't. And to some degree, what I'm going to share with you is through this process, I've been able to sit in on many conversations with the absolute experts in the field of vaccines and learn from them how things are sped up, how things should be done. And so it's been a learning experience for me, and I want to share their wisdom and their expertise with you. So how is it that we can have a vaccine so quickly after just learning about COVID-19 back about a year ago? Well, one of the reasons is because we have so many new technological tools. For example, compared to the last time we had a real big outbreak, which is HIV, which David and I have been working on our whole careers on, we had the ability to sequence new viruses very quickly. And in this pandemic, that happened quite early, and then it was shared across with different scientists in the field. If you also remember, we have Ralph Barrick and Timothy Sheehan, who are here at UNC, been working on coronavirus since the early SARS and MERS outbreaks, not pandemics, but outbreaks. And so they've been studying and thinking about how to prepare for what they knew was sort of coming all of this time. All of that work for years, frankly, is paying off right now. In addition, as David just mentioned, we have a newer vaccine technology with this mRNA vaccines, and there's no mistake that they are the first ones to start. This is a vaccine technology that really allows the scientists to pivot from one virus to another much quicker. That really is about knowing that sequence and being able to make that shift quickly. But in addition to that, they can also pivot the manufacturing for making an mRNA vaccine from one virus to another really quickly. So it's both the development and the manufacturing of this newer vaccine technology that has really allowed things to progress at this pace. The other thing that is just really key is that unlike ever before, in the very beginning, we had people recognizing the urgency and the need and coming together. And for these COVID-19 vaccine trials, that's Operation Warp Speed. That's the best of the best at the NIH. It's several of the previous HIV networks that have been doing large-scale studies, working together. And when you have all of those groups coming together and making a real commitment of thousands of people working into the nights, working on weekends, you can accomplish a lot. And one thing, there's several steps that get sped up. One, you don't have to go look for funding because everyone agrees that this is a need. In addition, these are very large scale studies that allow us to accrue the cases of COVID-19 much quicker. And also, unfortunately, we're in such a state with this pandemic that the number of cases that we're seeing also allows us to get the cases we need to be able to show where the vaccines make a difference between those who get it and those who get the placebo. All of those things are coming together to allow things to move quicker. In addition, it's not a new thing to do an interim analysis. So at some point, stop in the study and look to see, is the safety look okay? Should we continue? And also look, do we have an early sign that the vaccines are effective or not? And that's exactly what happened with Pfizer and Moderna. Again, not a new thing to do that, but for all the reasons I just mentioned and their accrual of the cases, we were able to show that the vaccines were frankly much better than we ever could have hoped for. What have we learned about these vaccines to date? So many of you may have heard about the data that's been released, both safety and efficacy. And as I mentioned, it's better than we hoped for, 94, 95% protective in preventing symptomatic infection. That's great. We're just ecstatic. The safety data looks really good. All of the side effects, if you will, that we're seeing are those we see with any vaccine, both in studies and in clinical practice. There's been nothing that's been unexpected. Most of the side effects are mild to moderate, what you would expect, some pain and tenderness at the site. In the case of Moderna, that's a little bit increased after you get the second injection, but mostly don't interfere with what people do. And moderate could mean that you just decided you needed to take Tylenol, ibuprofen because your arm hurt a little bit, or you felt like you had a low-grade fever. In the Pfizer study, 43,000 participants were on the study, Moderna, 30,000. So we have a large number of individuals who've received these vaccines that we have the safety data on. In addition, for the Moderna vaccine, we also know that it looks like it's going to be very good in preventing severe cases. There were 30 subjects in that study who had severe disease. 30 were in the placebo, none in the group that got the vaccine. Again, for the Pfizer study, very effective in preventing severe disease. There were 9 cases in those who got placebo, but only 1 in the vaccine. As yet, we don't know if these vaccines are going to prevent asymptomatic infection, meaning does it keep people from getting the infection at all? Would it keep people from having that and being able to transmit it to someone else? We will learn that. But for right now, knowing that these vaccines work to decrease severity and decrease severe disease, which gets people in the hospital, is just tremendous. So why do we feel comfortable in recommending this to you? What I can tell you, I'm a mom, I have parents who are older, I would recommend they get it for sure. It's because I know that the safety data and the efficacy. If you compare it to other vaccines, for example, flu is 40 to 60% protected depending on the year, given the nuances of that virus. Polio is 90% protected, but that's after 3 injections. Chickenpox is 82%. So again, the efficacy we're seeing is great. And with vaccines, you're really looking for side effects and tolerability right after the vaccine. In the studies, that period is for 7 days after receiving each injection. There are some other side effects that are farther out, but they're usually within like 2 to 4 months out from receiving the injections. We're far enough out in these phase 3 studies in that large number of individuals I just mentioned, and not seeing any of those, something we wouldn't expect or something that wouldn't be tolerated, wouldn't allow us to keep going. So that's why we feel comfortable in saying we think that these vaccines certainly are effective. We think that they are safe. David and I have publicly said we would receive them. Many of my other infectious disease colleagues feel the same. I would recommend them to my parents, as I said. So I think I've gone on probably too long, and I'll stop.
Thank you, Dr. Gate. It's terrifically helpful information. I'm going to pivot now to Dr. David Weber, who is a professor of infectious disease and is frequently introduced around here as North Carolina's Dr. Fauci. This information is moving so quickly, and Dr. Weber is going to update us about the FDA review of Pfizer and the events really of today. So, Dr. Weber, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be talking to you today. Let me say, first of all, I thank Dr. Gay for all her work and her summary. The Pfizer vaccine has already been approved last week in the UK, and they've started immunizing people. It was approved earlier this week in Canada. So we already have 2 regulatory groups that have looked at it and approved it. And I should say the data that was submitted to the FDA for their approval was just published today in the New England Journal of Medicine, and you can go look up the paper. As Dr. Gay mentioned, it was 43,000 people split between vaccine and placebo group. She already mentioned that the effectiveness was 95% of preventing symptomatic disease. I want to point out a couple of other things there. This effectiveness was observed across the subgroups, so it was similar despite age, sex, race, ethnicity, baseline Body Index, so obesity, and the presence of coexisting conditions. I do want to point out among those large trial that roughly 9% were African American and 28% were Latino. So we do know that in those subgroups, the vaccine was also highly effective. The group that was missing is pregnant women, and lactating women were not included in this. And we'll see what the FDA recommends with regard to those. Dr. Gay has already discussed the side effects. There were more after the second dose, but they were what you'd expect from a shot into the arm. Most of those were very short-lived and were local to the arm. We also know a commonly asked question is how good does the vaccine work after one dose? There was some data, it was about 50% effective after one dose, but we don't know how long that immunity would last. 95% effective after two doses. The second dose is given 3 weeks later. And the state will store vaccine. So anyone who gets the first dose can rest assured if they come in 3 weeks later, there will be vaccine for their second dose, and they achieve full immunity then 1 to 2 weeks after the second dose. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Weber. I'd now like to turn to Dr. Crystal Sine, a highly respected epidemiologist and physician who's the director of UNC Health's Health Equity Program. Dr. Sine is going to talk about our efforts to evaluate the data for the vaccine trials in underrepresented populations. Crystal.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ewend. Good evening, everybody. So yeah, I think a lot of people are wondering, and I know a lot of our Black and other people of color coworkers are saying, I'm not taking this vaccine. Why should I take this? There's a lot of fear around that. I think the first thing to say is that we hear you. I hear you. I think that the hesitancy and people feeling like they may be used as a guinea pig, are we being used as guinea pigs? I think the first thing is we're listening and hearing where that's coming from. And I think that's coming from a longstanding history of historical mistreatment and of Blacks and other people of color. We all have heard of Tuskegee, but certainly there are other instances of sort of experimentation in clinical trials and in clinical medicine. So we acknowledge that fear and that mistrust is warranted, and it's based out of people's lived experiences or the experiences of the communities that they come from. And so we hear you. I think that's the first thing I want to say. The second thing, though, is that we have, really an opportunity to be involved in creating a solution to this pandemic. We know that it takes all of us. We're all in this together. And so participating in clinical trials and also getting the vaccine is really important. Dr. Weber already talked about the number of Blacks and Hispanic or Latinx population that were involved in the trials. And I just want to put a little context to those numbers. So if we say 28,000 people, we know that those trials enrolled 30,000 folks, or I'm sorry, not 28,000, but if we say 28% of the people enrolled in the trials were Hispanic or Latinx, that's thousands of people. If we know that about 10% of those enrolled in clinical trials were Blacks. So that's thousands, that's 3,000 or more people. So we have been represented in clinical trials, maybe not to the extent that we would like, but we have been represented in clinical trials. I think the other thing is that for you all to feel comfortable and know that you're not being experimented on, it's really important for us to acknowledge what the typical process is when we think about clinical trials for any new drug or technology, and compare and sort of contrast that with what's happening with COVID. And I think the reality is, the fact that we're having this discussion, that we're all engaged in thinking about what has been the diversity in these trials is new and exciting, because how many of you know what the diversity has been, in trials of an Alzheimer's medication or in a cancer clinical trials, right? So the fact that we're being transparent and raising this issue, I think is something that we should really acknowledge and celebrate. And then, really show you that we have been represented in the trials. And so we do know the effectiveness and the safety of the vaccine in our racial and ethnic populations. And so I think that's the other thing, but we will continue to be transparent about this. I think that, I'm from North Carolina, people in my family, and I've even said, oh my gosh, is this for us? But I feel very confident. I am happy and look forward to being able to get the vaccine. That the level of transparency that we've had around this and the level of a scrutiny that we've had really shows some accountability that I think that we should all be comforted by and know that we're not being guinea pigs, but instead we're getting the opportunity to be able to contribute and make a difference for a situation that has felt very hopeless, at least to me, and not feeling like I could do a whole lot other than our three things that we still encourage. But the opportunity to get this vaccine really is another way for us to have the opportunity to contribute to ending this pandemic. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sine. Very powerful. I want to thank all of our speakers, but as they know, they're not done yet. My colleague, Steve Burris, who's the incoming Chief Operating Officer for UNC Health, is going to lead us through answering the many questions that you all have submitted. Steve?
Thank you, Matt. There's something to be said for a well-timed meeting. While we were in here tonight, the FDA advisory panel formally recommended that the FDA authorize the use of the vaccine. So breaking news while we're in here tonight. Matt, thanks for warming up our experts. We've had a large number of questions come in advance of this meeting, and we have sort of grouped those and categorized those. And now we're going to take advantage of the experts that we have with us to help answer those questions. So first question was asked by numerous individuals, including myself, and it's going to be directed to Laura Easton, President and CEO of Caldwell Memorial. The question is, Laura, how will I get my vaccine? How will I know when it's my turn?
Thank you, Steve. Yes, that's a question on all of our minds, and I'm getting it routinely in the hospital and in our communities. Every hospital and entity within the UNC healthcare system has pulled together a team of individuals focused on organizing our distribution. The vaccine will be distributed to employees at a local level, as Dr. Ewend mentioned earlier. And employees will be offered the vaccine as they become eligible based upon the federal definitions. Right now, we're all focused on employees eligible at the 1A phase at this time. It's a very fluid situation, and we're going to work very hard to communicate routinely and regularly to help people understand when it's their turn, when their time is up. Employees will be notified directly when they become eligible. 1A employees actually should be informed within the next few days as we await the arrival of these first vaccines. The system is a statewide system that we're working with, and it has the emails of 1A eligible employees in the system, and emails will be coming out to the first individuals who we're able to administer the vaccine to. That email will ask you to fill out a consent and to actually schedule your appointment. So that email process is very important to informing you and to helping you take that next step when you're eligible for the vaccine. So keep an eye out on your emails and your UNC email if you have a UNC email address. One thing that we've certainly been talking to our employees about is that if for some reason you feel that you should be eligible, but you did not receive notification, I just encourage you to approach your manager or the person you directly report to, and they can help you navigate the system and make sure that you get that vaccine when you're eligible. So thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Really appreciate the thorough answer. Next question is from an administrative associate at UNC Medical Center. Dr. Sine, this one's directed to you, and the question is, what is the plan to ensure equity in distribution of the vaccine, and how will we be sure that that plan is followed? Will executives and other leaders be allowed to jump the line?
So the short answer is no jumping the line here. But what we do want to do as leaders and executives is show partnership. So we have been very intentional and thoughtful about when executives and senior leaders should receive the vaccine. And the key considerations are, one, again, we know that COVID has raised an issue related to health equity. So we want the people who are at the front of the line, if you will, to be those groups and individuals who are at highest risk of either acquiring the virus or spreading that. So the prioritization scheme that we're following is that those high-risk groups are at the front of the line. I think that we know that there are some executives who may be members of those high-risk groups because they are clinicians. So they will be prioritized in the order that they would naturally fall based on when they would get the vaccine. So it's not their status as a leader that puts them ahead of the line, but it's their other considerations that would apply to everyone. I think the other thing that as leaders, we have all committed to signing the, UNC Health COVID Leader Pledge, which says exactly that we're not going to jump the line, right? We do want to show that we are partnering and that we are jumping in, and we want to lead in the sense that we want to get the vaccine alongside of you, but we're not going to jump in front of you.
Great. Thanks so much, Dr. Snee. Next question is from a social worker at the School of Medicine, a rad tech at Caldwell, and many, many clinical nurses. And Dr. Gay, this goes out to you. Are there certain groups that should not receive the vaccine? For example, cancer patients or the immunocompromised? What about women who are pregnant, planning to become pregnant, or breastfeeding?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we've gotten that one as well. Although these vaccine studies have excluded individuals who are immunosuppressed or compromised in some way, it wasn't out of a safety concern. If we remember, a phase 3 study is all about determining whether the new product is effective or not. And we know that individuals who do not have a fully robust immune system may not respond as well to vaccines. That's clearly demonstrated across many different vaccines. So the reason to exclude them was not a safety, just because we wanted to be able to show the maximal effect of the vaccines. So it would be okay for individuals with cancer or who are on some sort of immunosuppressive drug, we think, to get the vaccines. I would say, based on sort of what I'm sure some individuals have heard in the media about some allergic reactions to the Pfizer vaccine once it was rolled out in the UK, it does appear that those individuals that had that had a history of severe allergic reactions. So I would say the individuals who may have had that need to talk to their physicians and really, weigh the risk and benefits in that scenario on an individual basis. The question of pregnant women is a trickier one. Again, pregnant women were, and breastfeeding women who are breastfeeding were excluded from the vaccine trials because we wanted to demonstrate effectiveness and safety prior to having pregnant women receive these. So it's a little tricky to say whether in a blanket way, whether these are going to be safe and for women and their sorry, it's late in the day, and their infants to come, I guess, is the best I can come up with. So I would say we'll have to see what the EUA is going to say, and if it's pregnant women are eligible, I would again caution each individual pregnant woman to really think about the risk and benefit. For example, do they have some chronic conditions that put them at increased risk for severe disease? To what degree are they able to really practice all the safety precautions that we know work at home and the rest of their lives? We know that these things work because they've worked in the healthcare setting to keep all of us safe when we're in the hospital. So my best advice would be for pregnant women, again, to talk to their obstetricians and their primary care physicians, and really on a case-by-case basis, weigh the risk and benefit for themselves if the EUA is going to allow that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gabe. Next question is from a medical technologist at the medical center and a resident physician. Dr. Weber, this one's directed towards you. Will staff have a choice of which vaccine they receive? And also, as other vaccines are approved, how will those be incorporated into our plans?
So thank you very much for that question. I should say both the vaccines, as has previously been noted, are mRNA vaccines made very similar, creating the same antigens to the spike proteins. So we believe they're similar. That said, they're not mix and match vaccines. So if you start on one, you would stay with that for your second dose and not mix. We do expect that we'll get Pfizer vaccine next week. The Moderna vaccine will likely be reviewed by the FDA in 1 week and will likely be approved, so it would ship a little later. The Moderna vaccine is a little more stable at temperatures. Both vaccines need special cold storage, but the Moderna vaccine can be stored in the refrigerator. So we believe the state will preferentially ship the large medical centers like UNC and Rex and others the Pfizer vaccine and ship the Moderna vaccine to CVS and Walgreens for providing to nursing homes. So likely we'll only have a single choice of a vaccine. In the future, of course, as more vaccines come out, they will go through the FDA, then in the Centers for Disease Control, as will these vaccines. And with all other products, they then will come to the Anti-Infective Systems Subcommittee, where a number of experts in pharmacy, ID, and others will approve them. From there, they go to the System Pharmacy Committee, and they would then be approved. We'll have to look at the safety, efficacy, and ease of use for the other vaccines to decide how we will rate them compared to the ones that will be released. Some of the vaccines that might be released in the future are single-dose vaccines, which would certainly be easier to use. And if we obviously had a choice between a 2-dose and a single-dose vaccine, everything else being safe, regard to safety and effectiveness, we would choose the single-dose vaccine. But of course, the most important thing is to get more vaccines released. So that means we can immunize everyone in the public who wants a vaccine much faster.
Thank you very much. Next question is from a patient transporter at Rockingham and a care management supervisor from Rex. And Dr. Wohl, this one's directed towards you. What if a person is unknowingly COVID positive when they receive the vaccine? First part of the question. Second part is it necessary to test before receiving the vaccine? And then the third part, sorry, you're getting a complicated question here, is should I get a vaccine if I've had COVID, if I have it currently, or if I've had it in the past?
Yeah, these are great questions, so I appreciate that. You know, one thing we have to be clear about is that there's going to be some guidance, in fact, more than guidance, some criteria we have to follow regarding the use of the vaccines when they come out. Just to be really, really clear quickly, these are not FDA approvals of these vaccines right now. They're authorizing what's called emergency use, which means that the data on hand indicate that there's potential benefits that outweigh the known risks. So it's different than full FDA approval, saying this is a crisis and there's good indication these things work. But they come with some guidance on how to use them. And we have to adhere to that guidance. So a lot of this may be dictated by the language that accompanies these EUAs or emergency use authorizations. And we'll probably see that tomorrow for the Pfizer vaccine. So regarding pregnancy, like Dr. Gay said, we may not have a choice. That may be dictated to us in the beginning, especially. Same thing here. I think what we're going to see is that there's going to be some restrictions. We're not going to test people for antibodies to see whether or not they have had prior COVID-19. We allowed people who came in who may have been unknowingly infected into our studies. So we know how it works in people who already have antibodies. That's one. Number two is maybe the vaccine produces a response even better than what natural infection may produce, especially for people who are asymptomatic. So we don't know that for sure, but it's not a contraindication. We should be very clear. We have plenty of people who entered our trials who had antibodies that were there when they got the shot, and they've been fine. So there's no safety issue that we're seeing there. So no, there's no test. I would delay things. I would add another step. So we won't test people for antibodies when they come in to see. Now, if you've been previously diagnosed with COVID-19 and you were sick with it, I have a feeling the EUA is going to say that you got to get to the back of the line until we get more data. But that's not someone who we're going to vaccinate anytime soon.
Great. Thank you for answering a complicated question. Next up, this question was asked by numerous people. I'm going to direct it to Dr. Pettigrew, who we've not introduced earlier tonight. She's the medical director of the Orange County Health Department and medical director of occupational health at UNC Medical Center. Dr. Pettigrew, your question is, do I need to quarantine after receiving a COVID-19 vaccine? And will I need to follow quarantine protocols if I come into contact with a COVID positive person after receiving the vaccine?
Thanks, Steve, for that question. That is definitely a question I've fielded many times in the last few weeks. So a couple things. It's important to remember that this is a 2-dose series, at least for Pfizer and Moderna. And so it's going to take a few weeks, even after that second dose, to reach your full immunity. So we need to keep that in mind too. But right now, it's unknown if the CDC or if the state is going to change their recommendations for quarantine. So for right now, we don't know, and we need to see what happens when people get vaccinated and whether they do still need to quarantine or not after being exposed. What we do know, though, is that this vaccine is really exciting. It's a light at the end of the tunnel, but we need to keep in mind that it is still one tool in our toolkit, and we need to make sure that we don't forget to use all of the other tools to fight this pandemic. We can't, get our shot and then rip off our mask and go and have a huge party. COVID is out of control at this point throughout our state, and we really need to hunker down. And we're going to need to use all of the things at our disposal, including vaccines, including continuing to wear a mask even after we're vaccinated, continuing to be physically distant, social distant, washing our hands, staying home when we're sick, all of those things.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Pettigrew. We're running a little close on time. We're going to do our last question and then bring this to a conclusion. This is from a recovery nurse at Nash. And Dr. Gay, thank you. You're the proud recipient of the person who has to answer 2 questions tonight. Should someone with a severe allergy to the flu vaccine receive a COVID vaccine? And if so, what type of monitoring should be required post-administration of the vaccine?
Yeah, thanks. And I sort of alluded to this a little bit based on what was just released about the allergic reactions with the Pfizer vaccine in the UK. I think if someone has had a severe reaction to the flu or any other vaccine, again, need to weigh the risk and benefits of whether proceeding is worth it. I think when we're concerned about any potential allergic reaction to any and frankly, FDA approved medications that we use all the time, we would observe that individual for a little bit longer. And I would say at least 30 minutes. And that's what we've been doing on the COVID vaccine trials, just to sort of watch for that and be able to react if needed. So I think if someone who had a severe reaction decided to go forth, they just need to alert the people who are providing the vaccine, have a plan, and be observed for at least 30 minutes, if maybe longer, but 30 at least. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much. I want to thank all of our experts for their time tonight and extend a virtual round of applause to you. So thank you very much. As you all know, this situation is evolving quickly and many people are working hard, in fact, around the clock to finalize plans. We are committed to transparency in the process, which I hope our call tonight demonstrates. And we will regularly share information as we have it at the system and local levels. I want to reiterate that taking the vaccine is not mandatory, but based on the current data, we are comfortable strongly recommending getting vaccinated. I plan to get vaccinated when it's my turn. In fact, the executive teams across the system have all pledged to get vaccinated when it's their turn. But I want to reiterate what Dr. Sine said earlier. We will not take one dose from a frontline coworker. We will only take the vaccine when it is our turn. For more information, you can go to a new website that we've established. It is yourshot.health. That is yourshot.health. Remember, we're one great team. Thank you for your hard work. Please take care of yourselves and each other. And thanks again for your time tonight.